So I'm supportive of people leaving relationships if they've busted their ass and they can walk away saying, I've basically thrown the kitchen sink at this thing. I've tried everything and it still isn't doing anything after a year or two of like really hard work. Yeah, like you probably should move on.
Jayson Gaddis, I am thrilled to welcome you, my friend, to the Better Show. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. Grateful to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to have you on the show. I've been a fan of your work for several years. I followed you on Instagram and your body of work around relationships. And I thought we might just dive right in, certainly around the idea of a long-term relationship. So just a little bit of a pre-framing for our listeners. We are going to be talking primarily about a long-term relationship. I'm going to speak from my experience, being in a heterosexual relationship, but I'm sure that we're going to just do our very best to be all inclusive in terms of all types of combinations and relationships. But my first question to you is, there was a post that you had on Instagram. Why is marriage so hard? So you have this post that's like, never get married unless you have these sort of 3 things that you are willing to do. And I was talking to Giovanni just before we got recording today. And, he came to give me a hug and I was like, isn't it so awesome that our relationship is so difficult? And he was like, what? And when I sort of corrected myself, what I was trying to say, but certainly didn't come out so eloquently, was that it's in the pursuit, it's in the difficult, it's in the effort that, all the things that are worth having are found. And I would include a long-term relationship as part of that, just like weightlifting is, it's a long-term relationship, like eating right, long-term relationship, having a nourishing relationship with your partner takes a lot of work, but it's in the work that you find, maybe yourself, and it allows you, it's fertile for growth.
Amen to all that. Yes. Well said. Yeah, I'm a big fan of marriage. I've been married almost 17 years together, 21 almost. And it's the dojo. It's like my spiritual dojo. And I've grown more in my partnership than I have in all the other personal growth endeavors I've done. So big fan of long-term partnership here. And I tend to focus on it because it seems to be the hardest relationship. Like most of us can do friendships pretty well or co-working relationships pretty well. It's much harder to live with someone day in and day out for years and have all the things come up that we don't like about each other, that we don't like about ourselves. It's very vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's an opportunity to co-create greatness, right? It's like the garden that you want in your backyard. It doesn't just appear, right? You have to tend to the weeds. You have to plant the flowers that you want. You have to be out there all the time, singing and talking to your flowers and pruning and giving them the right, environment in order to, maybe not the singing part, but that's what I do in my garden. So what are some of the elements that you have observed both in your own personal relationship, your own personal long-term relationship, and with some of the couples that are able to make a long-term relationship work? What are some of the characteristics that we see?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to back it up by saying people have no idea what they're getting into when they get married. They really don't. And so let's talk about what doesn't work for a minute.
Yeah.
Which is thinking that when you meet the one or find the right person, that it's somehow magically going to work out with no effort on your part. Okay, that's a huge mistake. Also, chemistry and shared values, thinking that, hey, we have a lot in common, or gosh, we've got good chemistry, we have good sex, and this is in the first year, of course. So therefore, we should be a great couple. And it's just not. Most couples that think that way are going to crash and burn. So the single biggest feature, honestly, to make a marriage or long-term partnership really successful is a willingness to look at oneself in the mirror and take responsibility for what's getting activated and understand the impact of your behavior on the other person. This is huge. So that requires some kind of growth mindset, right? You're very familiar with that. And people who don't want to look in the mirror don't do well.
Do you think that attitude, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but as you're talking, I wonder if that is a bit of a different attitude in some of the, maybe we'll say the younger generation, where there is this sort of everything has sort of been handed to them on a plate. Everything is easy. Food is within 30 minutes on their phone.
Mhm.
Knowing where everybody is on whatever app, on Snapchat, you give up your privacy by, snapping to your friends about where you are every moment of the day, let's say. Do you think that the willingness to work hard is lost on some of the, and maybe you've seen this in your coaching practice, do you see that the willingness to work hard is lost on some of our, individuals who are in their 20s and 30s and now starting to think about, maybe I've been in this relationship for a while. Do you think it comes more difficult to our younger generation?
Maybe I would say maybe that I do think, because we could generalize other groups of people like males, and we
Right.
could say a lot of men, for whatever reason, feel entitled when it comes to relationships and don't want to do the quote do the work, right, as you suggested earlier. I wonder actually if younger people, I do think you're right in that they're getting handed a lot of things and things are so fast and easy, and I can order my groceries and my Uber Eats and I don't have to do the dishes, and my rich parents can just kind of take care of me. But I think that's mostly a privileged problem. Privileged kids whose parents are still doing everything for them. I think that's a real problem because when
Yeah.
it comes to long-term relationship, that's not going to fly.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation about parenting, but I'll just say this maybe before we move on, is one of the things I've always been acutely aware of in becoming a parent is that my job is eventually to become obsolete. Like my job eventually is so that I actually don't matter anymore in the survivor, whether my child survives or thrives in the world. So that, of course, when they're younger, that, I'm going to be responsible for, their food and their shelter and the Maslow's hierarchy. But as they sort of are growing up, that I am removing myself strategically and periodically from different parts of their life such that I become obsolete in their lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And letting kids fail and fall down, right, is so important for building resiliency.
Yeah. So back to relationships. So tell me why is love not enough? Because you said something really interesting where, you meet someone and you have this fantasy which is absolutely propagated in the rom-coms that we see and the Hollywood movies and everything, that it should just feel, that you never fight and that there's never any conflict and that love should be enough, that the love alone should be the thing that will get you through any type of scenario that you might face together.
Yeah.
Why is that not right?
It's terribly flawed. And people tell me this all the time, and they've been married for 20 years or 10 years and they have all kinds of problems in their relationship. And they say, "Well, we love each other. I don't know what the problem is." And I'm like, "That's because love's not enough." Like if you rely on love, we just love each other. That somehow means I don't have to put any effort in or understand myself in relationship to you. I don't have to learn about my nervous system and how it works in relationship to you. There's so much that just gets missed when we subscribe to that kind of BS fantasy that love is somehow should make a relationship work. It's not remotely enough.
Because loving someone else requires
Work.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think about it, right? It's sort of like you're in the health space and you help people sort of have a relationship to their body, mind, and what they're putting in and how they're taking care of this amazing vessel they have. That's a relationship that's kind of difficult. It's crunchy, it's complicated, it's got all kinds of layers, it's so nuanced. And the same is true with loving another human being. And parents, it's a little easier, like for parents to just say, "Oh, well, I just love my kids no matter what they're going through." But to do that on a partner is much harder because they're not your blood. They're some random person you met and joined forces with. And once you get out of the honeymoon phase, they get really difficult and they do things that annoy you and you do things that annoy them. But the practice is to love them and accept them and not try to change them and continue to learn how do I wow this person. And they're often a reflection of disowned parts of ourselves that we haven't loved, that we can project onto the other person. So I think this incredible partnership's this incredible vehicle to learn how to love someone and love ourselves more fully.
Yeah. And loving ourselves, I mean, even before we think about loving someone else, what an accomplishment, what a feat to be able to love all of us. So many of us go through life just loving the shiny bits, right? And we sort of put the parts that we don't really want to think about somewhere in the dungeon in the back of our subconscious or unconscious, and we never visit that. So even just loving ourselves, you can imagine how difficult. I mean, everybody listening to this knows how difficult that is. It's easy to love all the bright, shiny, sparkly bits, but some of the darker shadow side, if you will, is much harder to love. And now you're asking someone on top of loving yourself, now you're going to love another person who also has bright, sparkly, shiny bits, which is likely what attracted you to them in the first place. But then, as you said, as the sort of infatuation phase, that honeymoon phase maybe starts to fall by the wayside, we start to see some of their own flaws in their thinking and their behaving and the stories that they tell themselves and their own traumas. And we are now asked if in order to make a long-term relationship work, to also love all of them as
Hmm.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tall order because if you think about the loving yourself, yeah, I can kind of do that in private and I can try to sit on my meditation cushion and journal and only I know about my issues. But when I'm living with
Right.
you,
Right.
all comes out. It's very hard to hide in a long-term relationship. And I think that's where the potency and magic is I can't hide from my wife. And so my neurotic parts are all coming out and she's like, oh, damn. And then it's like, and same with her. And our work is to learn to love.
So what does this okay, so I want to talk a little bit about codependency. This gets a lot of airtime. People talk about being codependent a lot now, in the same way that a couple of years ago everybody was a narcissist.
Yeah.
Like if you met the
Yeah.
sort of diagnosis for one, and of course everybody's a narcissist to some degree, right? There's a sliding scale, there's shades of gray. Let's talk a little bit about what codependency is. So like signs and symptoms of a codependent, maybe that comes back to your own upbringing. And then I would like to contrast that with what a secure attachment might look like in a relationship.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Codependency in my world is where I help you, but you don't help me. And so they're often unequal, non-mutual, non-reciprocal relationships where the term originally came from a co-alcoholic in the work of Alcoholics Anonymous because they found that the person who is trying to get their alcoholic partner sober had a lot of issues themselves and they were actually part of the problem, which is so interesting because the codependent has so much of their attention on their partner who's got issues or who is withdrawing, retreating, avoidant, has an addiction, is depressed, anxious, has some mental health diagnosis. The codependent is often the helper, the fixer, the rescuer, the nurse, the doctor,
The martyr.
and the martyr.
Yeah.
And that often, if we rewind the tapes in that person's life, they usually grew up in a family where mom was sick or dad was an alcoholic, and the way they got love and connection was to try to be helpful. And they tracked the family kind of relational dynamics and did their best to mitigate harm and increase connection. And then that became a habit. And so, of course, in their adult life, they attract a partner who's got an issue of some kind or many issues, and they want to fix it. And so it becomes this very strange, non-mutual relationship, again, where, hey, I'll repair with you. I'll take responsibility for my part in a fight, but you won't do the same for me. And then people want, like, what is wrong with me and my relationship? And it's like, well, and they often have it that the other person needs to change. But I always tell them, well, no, you have something to change.
And that must be more common in women.
I think so. I think that's fair because women are so much more relationally trained to like be sensitive to relationship dynamics when they're little, whereas boys are taught to prioritize themselves and not the relationship when they're growing up. So I think
Mhm.
that's probably true.
Yeah. And so that's codependency.
Hmm.
So let's contrast that now with what a secure attachment style might look like.
Yeah. So if you have no relationship issues at all, which is very few, if not nobody, you probably have some insecure pockets in yourself and relationally speaking with other people. Most of us grew up in families where we couldn't really express ourselves fully, or we would have gotten punished or neglected or ignored or something. There would have been some kind of consequence. So we learned strategies to keep the connection going. And often it comes at the expense of our true, who we really are inside. So we end up in adult relationships where we feel like we can't be ourselves. That's an insecure relationship dynamic where we don't repair conflicts. We just kind of wait 3 days and hope it goes away. And we have a glass of wine and watch Netflix and we feel better 4 or 5 days later. That's an insecure attachment bond between two adults. Securely attached adults behave in ways that are mutually beneficial. They collaborate well through the difficulties. They embrace challenges. They make mistakes like the rest of us, but they repair those mistakes consistently and repeatedly and in a timely fashion. This leads to just the feeling in the home. When you come home, you actually feel like your nervous system can let down and you're relaxed. And both people feel that way. You're giving and receiving an exchange that feels fair, it feels mutually beneficial, and generally it feels good. And again, that's notwithstanding there's crunchiness and conflict and issues, but they're both bought into working through those issues and getting back to zero or back to a good place.
No matter what.
No matter what, consistently and repeatedly.
All right, let's lean into that. We talked a little bit about the importance of and this is something that I think you're most well known for, which is this conflict repair cycle. And it seems to be that it's not the absence of conflict that makes a robust, long-term relationship thrive, but it's the repair piece after conflict occurs. So I think that there's a couple of things here. First, we have to all recognize that there is going to be conflict. And then it's what we do afterwards in that reparative process that I think is what where a lot of your work tends to focus on. So let's open up that topic and talk a little bit about why it's so important for us, to accept that there is going to be conflict. I mean, we touched upon that with sort of some of the, the Disney fairy tale rom-com silliness that we're all, especially women, are pandered to around. You're just going to have this perfect prince and he's going to sweep you off your feet and it was happily ever after. So there's that piece. And then when there is conflict, how do we be, I mean, maybe even during the conflict, how are we good fighters? How do we not fight dirty? And then what does the reparative process look like afterwards?
Yeah, awesome. Let me back it up by talking about just quickly parent-child attachment dynamics, because that's where the term came from, is mothers and infants really, and raising kids in a good way.
Yeah.
If you think about a mother raising a baby, an infant, she can't be perfect. It's impossible. She's going to miss moments when the baby needs something and she's unavailable. She's on her phone or she's triggered or whatever happens. And I get this can happen with a dad too, but let's just kind of be honest that most of the caregiving is still happening through women. And so the mother's ability to repair all the mistakes, or as Ed Tronick calls them, mismatches in the connection between baby and parent, the more securely attached that baby is going to become to the mother. And the more it's going to feel like it's safe and it can express who it is and it will get its needs met. And if that's consistent over time, again, that's what leads to the secure attachment, is not the absence of those mistakes. It's how quickly and effectively mom repairs them. And the baby has a part in that too, but mostly it's the adult's responsibility. So if we zoom into adults in our relationships, the strength of an adult partnership and a bond over many years is not, as you said, not built in being nice and avoiding the hard conversations. It's embracing all the hard stuff that comes up between us and within us and without of us and our friends and our families, and working through it and having the respect and dignity to believe in each other and believe in ourselves that we can work through something hard, having the communication skills. And so repair becomes this vital skill. People ask me, well, what should I do during conflict to make it better? And I'm always like, you know what? We all kind of go offline a little bit in conflict. We go into the back part of our brain. We're reactive. We say the stupid thing. That's less important because we have so little control over ourselves. I'm not justifying abusive behavior, okay? But I'm just saying it's hard to really get a handle on your reactivity. What's more important, the most important thing, is how quickly you can recover from your reactivity, get that there's an impact on the other person, take responsibility for it, and clean up that mess. That's what builds secure attachment over time, is the repair.
So coming back to parent-child dynamics, I think that, becoming a parent, in addition to having a long-term relationship, also a very important long-term developmental course that you will be in forever. And we've had parenting experts on here, one of whom I think is worthy of mentioning, Jennifer Kalari. She was on several years ago, but she was on twice, one talking about younger children and then another episode talking about teenagers. And those two episodes, even though they were directed at children, actually changed the way that I interacted with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about this idea of connecting with your child first. So if your child is upset, let's say, one of the first things that oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Just stop crying. You're fine. You're fine. It's just a bruised, you just fell off you're fine. But we do that not because we do that to soothe ourselves because we are so
Yeah.
uncomfortable to see our child in pain. You're fine. You're fine. Stop, stop. Shh, shh.
Yeah.
Like, let's get this over with, rather than taking a moment and saying, oh my gosh, you really hurt your knee. That must have really been scary for you. And sort of matching their energy. And I mean, it's been revolutionary for me in terms of my parenting because I too, prior to having that conversation, sort of understanding this, she calls it the calm technique, which is like connect and affect and listening and mirroring.
Mhm.
I would try to, I was very uncomfortable seeing my children in pain, as you would be, but then learning how to appropriately respond to my kids, but then also to Giovanni, also to my partner.
Yeah.
So when my partner's upset, God, that must be so frustrating that, whatever happened, you missed this opportunity or this opportunity panned through. Like, I totally get how hard you've been working. And then all of a sudden it's like, they just feel seen. And then the frenetic energy around what they were holding, and not that it goes away, but there's a dissolution that happens in a way. Like they just calm down when they
Yeah.
feel understood by someone else.
Yeah, because they don't have to fight to be understood, and they don't have to stuff anything to make you feel okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me add one layer to that process that I love what you're talking about here. And there's just three things I would add, because sometimes we cause the harm to our child, or sometimes you cause something to Gio, right? You caused an upset, you did an action or something. And so if we actually did something, what you're saying is vital, which is, to me, it's kind of like empathizing and validating, kind of smashed together. And validating is best done in 3 words. That makes sense. In other words, your feelings make sense. Your upset makes sense to me. That can really help kids be like, oh, okay, I don't have to fight to be acknowledged here. And same with others. Your upset, honey, makes sense to me. And this is where some people get really stuck on, well, if I validate them, it means they're right and I'm wrong. And I'm like, no. Validation has nothing to do with right and wrong. Everybody's experience is 100%.
Or I'm enabling their behavior. It's just going to get worse if I agree with them.
Totally.
Yeah.
So everybody's experience is 100% valid, which has nothing to do with right and wrong. And then empathizing is like, a simple sentence is, I can imagine the impact on you was ... And you try to really feel into, that must have hurt. That must have been scary. That must have been frustrating.
You weren't picked for the basketball team. God, that must have been really hurtful. Something like that.
That must, you must feel really rejected and alone right now. And that sucks. That's validation, empathy. And then if we did something, we take responsibility. Just a simple, my part was, or my part is, and just finish the sentence. I raised my voice. I was rude in my tone. I didn't text you back. The more we can take responsibility for what we did or didn't do, the more the other person can settle, knowing that you're actually tracking yourself. It's when we are like, am I crazy? Because this person's not even owning that they did anything. Is it really all my fault? That's back to the insecure relationship.
Okay, so I have 2 questions here. First is being complacent, or just, I can't remember who I was listening to, but they were saying, one of the fastest ways that you can shut down any type of conflict or any type of argument is just to agree with someone. Be like, you're right. If someone's saying whatever they want, like, you're an idiot, or I don't agree. And this is more in the online, the conversation I was listening to is more in the context of the online space. But one of the ways that you sort of circumvent that is just to say, you're right. So my first question, I have several that are popping up into my head faster than I can actually keep track of. But the first one is being complacent okay in a relationship if it reduces conflict? Like, so if we agree with them and say, you know what, you're right, I'm doing everything wrong, or I'm not, holding up my end of the bargain. Is that a good strategy to reduce conflict? Or the idea is not necessarily that we want to reduce conflict, that we want to lean into it and say, well, this is why I wasn't able to get such an, this is why I haven't been able to hold up my end of the deal.
Right. I'd say no, it's not good enough, especially if I have to abandon myself or not include my experience in saying I agree or sounds good, or, and I'm just trying to reduce the conflict. If that's my agenda, I have to really look at, like, why am I using this technique to minimize upset? I think there's more effective techniques that can include yourself and your experience. And I would prefer those.
Okay. The other thing that I think about on the topic of complacency is, and I heard a stat and I haven't verified it, but I'm trusting the source. It was, and I know he can be a bit controversial, but Jordan Peterson had said something like women initiate 70% of divorces. So they are usually the initiator, which actually surprised me. I didn't realize that. I sort of always had in my head, maybe again, infected from Hollywood, that it's, the cheating man or something that finds it's like you're 40-year-old, I'm going to trade you in for two 20-year-olds, that kind of silly thinking. And one of the things that he said was when a woman starts to be like, you're right, it's like, sure, whatever. And I think what he was trying to say is the opposite of love isn't hate. It's more like indifference. It's more like, sure, honey, like whatever, yes, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you see that pattern as well where and it could be either male or female, but I'm just speaking about it from a female perspective. Is the indifference or the complacency, is that a red flag for the longevity and vitality of a relationship when someone's not willing to fight anymore?
Yeah, 100%. So male or female or whoever initiates, basically my interpretation of that dynamic when a woman finally is like, I'm done, it's because she's been trying for years to get her guy on board with either the work or, hey, will you validate my feelings? Or, hey, can we have a fair dynamic here where you take responsibility when you're upsetting me? Or can you learn about my emotions a little bit so that you know what to do with them? So I don't have to just always go to my girlfriends and you actually can hold space for me. Like when a woman tries and tries and tries and reads all the books and listens to all the podcasts because she's more relationally oriented than he is, that leads to burnout, right? Eventually. And so the indifference makes sense to me. And the checking out or the initiation of a divorce is like, good for her. And I feel, it's not that she should have hung in there and so we don't have more divorces. It's like, no, we have the privilege and freedom now to have the kind of relationships we want if we want them, but we have to be willing to do, both of us, work to get that.
And so what is the point where you would say, or you would counsel a couple to say, listen, you guys have tried everything. Like when do you continue to push? Like when do you continue to try and make it work? And when do you quit? Because quitting has a lot of heavy language around, like being a quitter,
Right.
There's a lot of heaviness around that language. And so, even myself, I don't like to quit. I like to, I like to push and I like to win, and quitting feels like failing. So when do we know when something has sort of run its course and it is time, if in the case of a relationship, to check out? And when is it time to really have a heart to heart and to be vulnerable with your partner and say, hey, this isn't working for me?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think people end relationships because of boredom or burnout usually. And if you have a willing partner, I think that's the single biggest determinant of whether a relationship, people should stick with it. If both people are willing to work on it, meaning go to coaching, get some therapy, read some books, practice tools, take a course. If you have a willing partner, quitting should be a last resort. However, two willing people can kind of go in circles and seem to not really get to the real issue. And that's where a good outside facilitator can help someone get to the bottom of like what the actual issue is and help them have a breakthrough. And sometimes people stick around too long and they're just abandoning themselves, and the stress and how this is bad for their health and the sleep is just not good for people. So I'm supportive of people leaving relationships if they've busted their ass and they can walk away saying, I've basically thrown the kitchen sink at this thing. I've tried everything and it still isn't doing anything after a year or two of like really hard work. Yeah. Like you probably should move on.
Let's talk a little bit about sex in this context, because I think there's a couple of different narratives around sex in a long-term relationship. The first is, we've already sort of touched on it, that when you are initially in a relationship, there's pheromones, there's infatuation, there's dopamine, there's, you just can't get enough of each other.
Yeah.
And that usually lasts, typically in terms of, neuroscience, looks like it lasts around 1 to 2 years. And then after, and that's sort of you can look at this from an evolutionary perspective. You can cut it a lot of different ways. Like it's supposed, get in, have the babies, and then, and then after that, the dopamine, the serotonin, the excitement, all of that seems to temper down. However, I take issue with it. And I'll tell you, I would say that 2 years is it's time, but it's not really a ton of time, I would say, for intimacy. And the framework that I like to think about, you know, intimate relationships with your partner is that I would like to think, and maybe this is just fantasy, so you can redirect me here, but I would like it to get better with time rather than worse, because there is that trust and intimacy, and we're working hard to remove that residue that can sort of pile up in a relationship over time. We all hear about they've been married for 50 years, but they might as well just be roommates. Like they don't know each other. They're trying to spend as much time apart as they can. So tell me, let's just start with, am I wrong for wanting that? Am I wrong for wanting my sex life to get better with time?
Not at all.
Is that
so awesome?
And, yeah. And Gio's not going to listen to this. Don't worry. You don't. No, but is that a fantasy for me to say, listen, I want to work on this, and for that intimate sort of partnership with him to be curated and get better with time? Or is it just like we're cruising downhill from here?
No, I'm with you. I think it's a beautiful aspiration and very possible. Now, if you and Gio, let's say, had a bunch of other issues, let's say you weren't aligned on your parenting, there were some unresolved resentments about your families, and there was just a bunch of stuff in the way, you shouldn't expect that, because sex is almost over, in a long-term relationship over many years, sex is like this beautiful reward you get for keeping things safe and clean and clear between the two of you. Because why would you ask your partner to open their body to you when you're being a complete asshole? You've got to earn the right to make love to your partner in a really beautiful way that will improve over time. And if two couples are actively engaged in keeping their relationship vibes really clean and clear and at zero, and like, hey, we're good. We have conflicts. We get upset. Yes, but we repair them. That couple usually has a better sex life than someone who's not doing that work. And that's long-term for sure. And I'm with you in that it can totally improve, and does improve, I think, over time, because you get to know each other more intimately. The trauma history comes out, just the memory in the body and the sensitivities. There are all these beautiful and sometimes painful and shameful things to work through and get closer. Like sex just becomes a crucible for learning about ourselves and each other.
And it's a vector for healing too, and to sort of be witness to someone. I've heard Nicole LePera talk about this, and certainly have had conversations with girlfriends who, post orgasm can find themselves crying or, having this sort of release. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to witness your partner have that healing moment, and that you have been a part of it in creating it in some way.
Yeah. Amazing. So healing. So there's so much healing in sex over time.
Can we have, and maybe the bigger question here is, can you have a long-term relationship without sex, without intimacy? Can they exist?
Yes, and people do all the time. Now, we could then ask the question, are those people fulfilled? And then we might get a different answer, right? Like, could I be fulfilled in a sexless long-term relationship? Probably, if I'm getting all my other needs met, and my sexuality has just gone offline for whatever reason, both of us, and we sort of agree to kind of not go there, but the rest of our life is fairly meaningful and good. I think that could happen, but I don't think it does happen for most people. I think people are in fear. They've just like sequestered this part of their lives and justified it in their head as like, well, I can't have that, or it's not for me, and we're just fine without it. And then they set their lives up to kind of avoid it. I just think they're missing out on a huge part of their journey and a part of their healing together. But I think people do all kinds of things, right, in relationship and justify it. But again, fulfillment. Am I fulfilled? Can I totally be myself here? Does my partner have my back? Do I have their back? And are we really being ourselves here? Those are kind of the hallmarks when we can kind of start to see if someone is actually rocking it out.
And what if a couple has mismatched sex drives? And I wanted to talk about this because I know, and I was saying to this in the pre-chat, in menopause, a lot of women will
Yeah.
start to acquire more gynecological issues than maybe they've experienced in their lives, where we start to see changes in estrogen levels. So that's changes in drive, both in excitement and receptivity to sex, and even just like lubrication and the ability to orgasm. And the tissues are dry because they're not being nourished with this hormone anymore, particularly in menopause. But it can be wildly fluctuating as well for many women in perimenopause as well. So, what are some of the things that, either the women or men who are listening to this show can think about when they're navigating mismatched sex drives? And I'm talking more about this for the woman who may be experiencing a lower sex drive.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, I can, after my children, like I was not thinking about anything other than my children. Like
Yeah.
there was no desire. It was like in the tank, and took a while to actually come back online. So is there something that we can be thinking about if there is a couple, maybe she's in her, 40s or 50s, 60s, and there's a difference that they're noticing in their sex drives?
Yeah, absolutely. And my wife is in perimenopause, and what I'm learning through her, not only with her body, but the women she's studying with and talking to, is this is a pretty common thing that you're spelling out here. And we're navigating a version of this now. And it's, like anything that happens in our lives, whether it's a health problem or menopause or different sex drives, these are all opportunities for us to get to know each other, respect each other, deepen, learn about ourselves and each other. So it kind of doesn't matter what the issue is, but let's say it's mismatched sex drives. It's just like, cool, let's talk about it. What's the impact on you? What's the impact on me? When you're always wanting sex and I'm hardly ever wanting sex, what is that like for us? Do I start to feel like pressure, and then I have to abandon myself to have sex with you? Well, do you really want that? Do you want me to abandon myself? No, of course not. And then what is it like for me that I'm feeling dropped over here? Like, you don't care about my body. You don't love me, or you don't want to touch me. Like, that sucks. And I want you to know that. And so and without blame, there's just this really wonderful open door to say, this is the stage we're at in our relationship. What's going on? Let's look at it. Let's get in there. And how can we meet somewhere in the middle? Or is there other ways I can pleasure you that would feel good to you, that would also feel good to me? Can we like stop defining sex as just intercourse, that it's so many other things and it's so much bigger? Can we open up, this learning experience for both of us?
And what about in the case of infidelity? So there's been a partner who has stepped outside their marriage for maybe for that reason, or maybe for other, there could be several other thousand reasons why somebody does that. What is a relationship doomed if there is infidelity? Can you repair and move forward? What have you seen in practice?
Absolutely, it can be repaired. I interviewed a couple actually on my podcast, a couple couples over the course of my podcast that recovered from affairs. And a lot of people don't, because the hurt feels so big, and the betrayal can trigger such a violation in trust that one or both people just feel completely, close-hearted and shut down and hurt. And then they don't want to, the problem with some of those people is they don't want to heal, and they're sort of get stuck in a victim position, and then they can't get any traction, and then they go ahead with their life story of like, yeah, I got cheated on and men are all bad and this is fucked up, and decades go by and they're still in their victim position. I'm just like, look, it happened, it's terrible, of course, and you got to heal with or without them. You got to heal, and there's ways to do that, together or alone. But I often find, like, I just worked with a couple recently who the man had an emotional affair, with sort of a colleague, not quite coworker.
What's an emotional affair?
An emotional affair is, I start a relationship, say, with this coworker, and he started having more fun with her than his wife, and they started doing things together as colleagues, and they justified them as, well, it's a work trip or it's a work thing. So there's no touching, there's no sleeping together, there's no kissing, there's no holding hands, none of that's there. But then they begin a text relationship, they start communicating over email, and it just feels really good. It feels like I got a new friend. And a lot of people, that's okay as long as you're not hiding it from your partner. But the moment you're starting to hide your texts or emails, that's an emotional affair. And what I've uncovered after working with a lot of these, and I've had an emotional affair many years ago, is anger. Hurt and anger are usually driving emotional affairs, and it's kind of like a fuck you to the partner.
The person who's instigating the emotional affair, there's hurt and anger in that individual.
It's deep down and it's buried. They don't have contact with it. It's unconscious, and this is acting out. An emotional affair.
And this is relative to their partner. They're angry at their partner. Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes they're projecting shit onto their partner, but often they're with a partner. And this is why when I'm working with affairs, I always say it takes two people to have an affair, not you and the person you had an affair with, but you two as a couple, the person that acted out and the person that got cheated on. That's two people. And I always challenge the person who got cheated on to take responsibility for their part. And they, of course, don't like that initially. But when I push them, they usually can find out, yeah, I actually was neglecting my partner. I was really self-absorbed. I was working all the time. I didn't behave in a way that had them feel like a priority. You know, when you can get into some ownership there, you're less of a victim. But as the couple heals, and you uncover those layers, they're like, oh, I can see why. Because an affair can really heal when both people are taking responsibility for co-creating the conditions. Now, one person acted out and actually did the cheating. Of course, that person's more at fault, you could say. But when the other person can say, I played a role here, man, the healing that can happen is really profound. And they can become a stronger couple with a stronger relationship.
Have you talked about this on your own podcast with your own emotional affairs or something? Okay, so so if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few more questions about this. So what happens when there's been no sexual, you haven't stepped outside sexually of your relationship, but you are now having lots of fun. I mean, so many people would just say, well, can't men and women just be friends?
Yeah.
And I think that they can, but I do think, to your point, I think it can be if you start to hide it from the partner, and all it really takes is like one person to start misinterpreting. Like, so when this was happening for you, maybe the individual who you were having this relationship with, all it takes is for her to start thinking, well, maybe this is a possibility. Like, maybe I really do have feeling like he's the best thing ever, et cetera. So I think that it's a really dangerous and slippery slope. So what is the conversation that happens between you and your wife about the situation? And then how do you start to, and she is willing to, as you said, take responsibility for her role in it. What does that conversation look like?
Yeah. So girlfriend, to be clear, long time ago. And I was at a meditation retreat and I met this woman and we sort of hit it off. And right before the meditation retreat, my partner and I were in a big fight. And so we were in a vulnerable place where I was like kind of really negative, spinning out about my partner and gosh, she's so high maintenance or, whatever. And then all of a sudden there's this person who's really easy and attractive and we instantly hit it off. There was just chemistry. Now on the surface, that looks like that's all that was going on. But later when I went to therapy around it and dug into it, I was like, and I had to really own like what was going on for me. I uncovered a lot of anger. There was hurt that she wasn't in this meditation community with me. I was judging her spiritual life. And I was not being direct, saying, my feelings are hurt. I'm judging you. I wasn't being transparent about any of that. I just took it kind of underground. And then it would come out sideways in snarky behavior, comments. And then on her side, if I remember right, it was like, yeah, I didn't ever validate how important this was to you. I never understood the total impact. I wasn't curious. I was kind of defending myself and kind of like going over here, doing my own thing. And so, it was just a rift. It was kind of like a rupture in our connection that we never really got to the bottom of. And so it was like left open and vulnerable for, someone to come in.
What do you think so in that same vein, what do you think are some of the things that men and women want in relationships? We're talking a little bit about this in the pre-chat. I have some inclination in terms of what I think women want and some inclination in terms of what I think men want, but I'd love your opinion on it.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be helpful to set up that frame with what you said earlier, which was, I think you said women want to feel safe and men want to feel respected,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, there's more to it, but I think that's a
Sure.
starting point. If a woman doesn't feel safe, I think she's going to get her defenses up. And I think if a man doesn't feel revered and respected, he's not going to sort of be the head of the house, if you will, or, to tend to his family.
Yeah. Well, I just want to challenge the male side of this because I'm always like, where does this come from that men want to be revered and respected? And I think that's true, but I think that's actually what that's playing to is the male ego rather than who he actually is underneath his ego, which is he's very much similar to her, which is he also wants to feel safe emotionally. He really wants to be able to open his heart and let down his guard and take off his armor and be his naked, transparent self without judgment and criticism. So many guys, their biggest button is, if you make a comment about something he did, and this is so true with me, I have a very sensitive button around criticism that like, I feel like I'm doing it wrong, or I feel like I didn't do it right, or whatever. And this has a lot to do with my dad and I's relationship growing up. And I think a lot of men are like me. So why would I want to cater to his defensive strategy of, oh, I need to respect you and revere you? Because how dare I actually make a comment that might suggest that I'm pissed off at you or you've done something wrong? Like, I want a guy, if I'm a woman, I want a guy who's like willing to be like, I don't want to be revered and respected. I want my feelings to matter. I want all my messiness below my defenses to matter to you. I want you to care as much about me and my life as you care about you and your life. I want you to take an interest in who I really am, on and on. So that's my bias, but I do think there is a certain type of dude that wants that. And that's okay. If two couples can agree that like, well, what do you really want here? What do you really want? If that's what they really want, okay, cool. Have your relationship behave in a way that, caters
Their
to
work. Yeah.
caters to those two.
Mm-hmm. So we're really not that different. So men are really not from Mars and women are not really from Venus. We just all want to feel safe and loved and understood and seen.
All of us want to be accepted for who we are. Absolutely.
What do you think we can learn from individuals who have been divorced, who have sort of pulled the plug and said, this is actually not working for me?
Oh God, so much. Because if you think of divorce, and the failure word is a strong word, but let's just use it for simplicity's sake, okay? In some people's eyes, divorce is a failure. It's not so much in mine, but like, okay, let's call it a failure. Well, like anything, and you know this from business, that failure reframed is learning, right? So as long as you're learning about what didn't go well and why it ended, and you're learning about what you contributed, how you contributed to the demise of the relationship. Maybe you stayed in it too long. Maybe you were kind of blamey. Maybe you behaved in ways that the other person didn't feel totally seen or considered. And, it's like look in the mirror and mine the lessons from this divorce and then apply them to your next long-term relationship. And you will guaranteed be much more strong and ready to have an even more awesome relationship if you learn those lessons, right? So I have friends who are divorced and I've learned so much from them because of the carnage that happened or how skillfully they ended things. Like there's a range from the people I know. And it's really cool that people that come out the other side just wiser, stronger, they know themselves better. It was painful as hell, but they're in a better place because they learned and they grew.
What are some of the things you've observed in friends who've been divorced? What are some of the things that they come away with?
So, for example, one friend was in a marriage for 20 years, married to a woman who was more on the avoidant attachment spectrum. And he was in the whole relationship, he was kind of trying to chase her and get her to connect with him and like have a better relationship. And she did a lot of spiritual retreats, but she never did the attachment work or the deeper work of like a partnership needs to do, I think, to be successful. It's like not enough to meditate. And it took him, probably 10 to 15 years of that marriage to learn that she wasn't actually going to ever show up for him and do this.
So she wasn't interested in it.
In the deeper kind of attachment work of like, when we repair, it needs to look like this. And you've got to actually learn how to validate my feelings. I'm going to do the same with you. She was just like, dude, like your triggers are your problem. They're not my problem. And So it took him a long time, and he finally extracted himself from that relationship. And it's like he's a different person. And now he's in a very secure, stable, kick-ass relationship that was what he wanted the whole time. But he hung in there just, you could say, too long. He just really tried hard for like way too many years.
He's a flamingo. He like mates for life, like no
Yeah.
matter what. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, which was
Right.
his ex-wife. And that's, and then she felt judged and criticized, of course.
This has come up in family discussions in our family, Giovanni's and my extended family, around the impact of staying married no matter what. And, you stay in the marriage for the kids. You're doing this service for the kids. And I've had a lot of people on the show, and I've asked them sort of this question in some, some form or another. But I think that the conclusion that most people come to is like, what kid wants that responsibility?
Yeah.
What kid wants to be like, what you guys did together for me? Like you guys, like our home life was miserable. You were always fighting. So, do you think that there is, and I'll say like in our extended family, there are people who've stayed together for the sake of the kids. And man, you see the most dysfunctional relationships that those children now engage in as adults.
Right.
So I have a very strong bias against that. I don't think you should ever stay in a marriage for kids because it's unfair to the kids, because you're showing them this sort of model of, what love is, like what the partnership should look like. I would love your expansion on that. I'm assuming that you are aligned with me and that you don't think that a dead marriage, like you shouldn't stay in a marriage for the children. And what do you think the impacts are, both on your life and then of course on your children's lives who witness and grow up in that environment?
Yeah. So I've worked with teens really since in my 20s, and all the teens I worked with, and I was mostly working with troubled adolescent boys. They are they were so amazing in almost every case, and they came from families that were obviously fairly dysfunctional. And often they came from families where the parents were doing this approach, staying in the marriage, quote, for the kids. And so I became very biased. And I agree with you mostly that staying in a dead marriage for the kids, I did a video about this years ago on YouTube, is not a good idea because of what what you're modeling every day, all day. And it could be lots of fighting, but often it's not. It's often just this kind of distant, somewhat cold, close-hearted roommate situation. That's usually what it looks like. And they're respectful, they're kind. Yep, hey, we live together. We're mostly focused on the kids. We don't have sex. We're pretty much not opening our hearts anymore. We don't take an interest in each other's lives anymore. It's all about the kids. There's a tremendous cost in the modeling that you're doing, as you pointed out, to those kids, and they're sponges. So they're sponging in how to do relationships every day by watching the big people in the home do their relationship. So that's the first thing. And I will say there's exceptions to this. Over the years, I've worked with so many people now that I have seen and kind of got behind. There was a couple couples where it was like, you know what, this is probably the best move for you two to just respectfully live together in kind of a dead marriage. You're raising your 3 kids, and
Was it because of finances? Like there was no financial viability for one or the other partner? Or why would that ever be an option that's like the best option for them?
Because of this other external stressors that were going on, of which I can't totally remember right now. Finances probably being one of them, especially if there's like financial dependency on one of the partners and they're in their 40s. That's very hard. So that's a piece. And in terms of the kids' overall well-being in their life, that they were like weighing out and these kids were all, quote, good kids on the outside, meaning they grades by measurement of like grades in sports and all the things that we measure kids by in this culture. They were kind of high functioning looking. I knew that their relationship life was going to be harder later in life, but it just seemed like, they waited out and it's like, okay, this is your life and you get to do that. Because so many of those people, it's the extraction process is pretty brutal. And I have had a few friends get divorced that their life got harder post-divorce, particularly these single moms I'm thinking about, thinking that divorce would lead to sort of more like, God, I can get out of this toxic asshole's life and I can like raise my kids. But the co-parenting nightmare that ensued, and how just, and one of the women actually was like, God, I kind of wish I would have stayed married, just because of how difficult my life is now. And I thought that was really interesting. I was like, wow. And that's her experience.
Yeah. Yeah, co-parenting can be very tricky. I think that you have to, because now you're not, now there's two different homes for the children. The children are being essentially shuffled back and forth, and there's no filter on what can be said, in the other home.
Right.
And, the whether things are true or not true, certainly that can be a source of confusion for the kids as well, because they just kids, it doesn't matter. Like you abuse them, you don't talk, they're going to love you. Like your
Yeah.
kids are going to love you no
Right.
matter what.
Yeah, no
And I think it's yeah. And it's really confusing for them when they see parents sort of bad mouthing each other too. I've seen that as well. And it's, yeah,
parents who triangulate with their kids and they talk shit about, like you said, the other parent.
yeah.
It's really bad. Yeah.
So you mentioned, all the ways that we sort of measure our kids, like, grades and sports. Are there other ways that we can, and this is maybe a little off topic, but just as a little interesting, are there other ways that we can grade success in our children? And then coming back to the context of relationships, what are some of the KPIs, maybe, the key performance indicators, if you will, for a great relationship? What are some of the things that you look for, those intangibles that, you mentioned one of them when you come home, you just like, you're nervous. It's like, you're just like, it's my safe, it's my safe place. But what are some of the ways that you think about success, both for our kids, non-tangibles or intangibles, and same with our relationship?
My wife and I talk about this a lot. So I guess it depends on your values, right? So for me and my wife, we have a high value on like relational literacy and success. So we're a very relationally focused family. I just did a podcast with my son yesterday, actually, about this, kind of asking him, what's it like to grow up in our family based on other families you see and friends' house? And
Yeah.
he's like, I think I could probably get advanced placement psychology and ace that test. Like, he's just very psychologically sophisticated. But it's a big one for us. Is really our probably our biggest KPI in our family is, are our kids connected to themselves? And I feel like
Mm.
that's our one job as parents, is to keep our kids connected to who they really are in their hearts. And because with all the pressures from peers and all the things that happen in social media, kids can leave themselves behind. That's what happened to me, for example, growing up. And that's a high price to pay, is leaving yourself behind on the journey of adolescence, for example. So I don't, obviously we're kind of, our sole job is to keep our kids connected to who they really are. That's probably our biggest one. And relational health being like, how are your relationships with other friends? Eventually when they start dating, they're a little young right now, but when they start dating, how are those relationships? And I feel very confident they're going to have really good relationships because of what they see every day, all day, and what we talk about, and how we talk about repair being the like most important thing. And they do that with each other. They do that with us. It's just the culture that they're immersed in. And I think it's the most important. I could give a shit about grades. I could give a shit about AP, whatever's. If they do that, fine. But I'm not high-fiving them for that. I'm high-fiving them for, it's like we had our family meeting the other day and I was like, what are our family values, guys? Again, remember, do hard things and embrace challenges, right? Do something hard every day and embrace challenges, and you're going to be just fine.
Don't die doing it. Yeah.
Right. I didn't add that, but I like that.
Do hard things, but try not to die. So what are this is so interesting. So what are some of the ways that you look at how your children are tethering to or remaining connected to themselves?
So my son just transferred from a very tiny Waldorf school to a big public high school with 2,000 kids. So it's a huge shift, right? And so we've spent all fall, we spent like helping him with this decision because he was very miserable in his ninth grade freshman year at this school. And he was looking depressed, and we've never had a depressed kid. So it's like, dude, what the fuck's going on here? And we knew it was the environment, right? But we didn't know, he's a boy, and we're like, dude, you got to talk about your feelings and we got to get this out. Like, let's deal. And if you're not comfortable talking to us, like, we can get a therapist or a coach or someone. But we worked through a bunch of stuff in the fall. He eventually makes the decision. And just the other day, and he's been kicking ass, but the other day he was so shut down and he was such a dick, frankly. And it lasted like 2 days. And so my wife and I noticed this immediately, right? We're just, any parent kind of, if you're plugged into your kids, you notice when something's off.
The emotional landscape change is apparent. Yeah.
Totally. And so we're like, all right. And then it's about, okay, how long is he going to be in this? What caused it? How do we get him out of this? And it's his problem in a way, but we don't want our kids to stay in that place. So it was cool. We just, I had to challenge him pretty hard. Like, look, dude, you don't want to stay stuck here. This is not good for you. It's not going to be good for your life. This was after like 48 hours of this. Because I have a low tolerance for shutdownness and disconnection. Like my wife and I don't tolerate that in our marriage, right? It's like we want to track each other so well that we're not allowing someone to go offline for weeks. That's not good for anybody.
Right, right.
So
And a week is a long time. Like 48 hours is a long,
it's a
I
long
mean,
time.
it's a long time to be down. Yeah.
Yeah, to be down. And dude, I spent my entire adolescence down for the count. That's not
Yeah.
good. That's fucked up. So
Yeah.
how can we help him come back? And we had some heart to hearts. He did some movement and he worked through it. And he's like the next day he woke up like back on point. Yeah. So that's it's sort of it requires a noticing of the parents. And again, depending on the values, like I have other friends who they're not like close friends, but like friends at his old school where the dad is tracking the kids, the sports he's doing and the grades he's getting. And that's like it. And I know where that goes. And that kid looks like a ghost. He looks like he's not even there. And the dad doesn't even see it. And I'm just like, dude, your son is so gone. This kid is so vulnerable to drugs and alcohol and all
Yeah.
kinds of shit. And he's just towing the party line. He's just doing what you want him to do to make you happy, but he's miserable. Not good.
Oh gosh, we see that so often, right? It's like kids become doctors and lawyers and pilots or whatever because they think that that's what their
Yeah.
parents want them, and they all they want to do is be a painter or something, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So staying connected to so that's sort of some of the family mantras. What about and are those similar in like you mentioned, sort of tracking the emotional landscape, let's say, of your partner? How do you monitor or how do you quantify success in your relationship with your wife?
Yeah. Very similar. It's about like the quality of the vibe between us and in the home. And she withdraws. I don't withdraw like she does. And so I can notice sometimes before she notices that she's withdrawing. And then I give voice to it. But I over the years, I've improved. It used to be more of an anxious, hey, where are you?
You're
Because
leaving. Where are you going?
I feel bad, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
need to like get back here because so I can feel better, which was more about me than her. And now she said, I appreciate you noticing. And because we're a team in helping her stay connected and to us and to herself. And we're a team helping me stay connected to myself and us. And we have a couple operating principles. One, we have an agreement that we never let something fester for more than 24 hours without talking about it. Because like you said, that's a long time usually for one partner. For the more withdrawing partner, they could go weeks and it feels like relief for them. They're like, oh God, I love that I'm away from this person and anyone in general. And I can just retreat inside myself because that's what I did as a kid and it's familiar and it works. But that's takes a toll on the relationship and the other person over time.
Yeah. It's catabolic. It's very
Yeah.
catabolic. Yeah.
Right. The withdrawing person has a responsibility. Like they need to know that the longer I wait, the bigger the mess is that I'm creating that I come back to. So it's actually in my best interest to come back sooner than later. So we have that one. Another one is standing for three, which is I write about in my book, which is I take a stand for my own success. I take a stand for your success and I take a stand for the success of the relationship, all three. And she does the same thing. And so in any given moment, if we're really struggling, it's like we can ask ourselves, wait, did I go into I and I forget about we right now? Am I in my I position and I've lost sight of the we or her? And sometimes I do. When I'm super stressed, I lose sight of us and I lose sight of her. And then it's like we name it and we come back.
And are there certain rituals or is a certain cadence to, you mentioned the family meeting? I'm assuming there's like, do you have things like scheduled? Like Giovanni and I we have like a financial review where we sit down and we talk about our finances. We have sort of a couples review. I don't know. We sort of have a couples meeting where and I know he's mentioned this, so I'm not, and I've said this on the show before, where we will say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, terrible, 10 being like, where have I been as a support vehicle for you this week? And if it's anything less than a 10, Like, what are some of the things that I can do to bring the 7 or whatever number, up to the 10 for this week. So we have this little ritual that we do.
Yeah.
Do you have anything similar that you do? Is there regular? We also, we're going to Pitbull this weekend. I'm very excited. Like, we have date nights and things where we have like experiential things, and not all the time, because sometimes there's no, the allowance for that doesn't, but when Pitbull comes to town, like, we're going to see Pitbull,
Okay, cool.
But is there any rituals or cadences that you employ in the relationship? Date nights, for example, or you meet about finance, anything like that, that you feel has really contributed to the success and longevity of your relationship?
Yeah. I like all the things you're doing, by the way. Those are so cool. We don't do a rating scale. It's pretty much a daily, because we both work from home. She has an outside office, but we're around each other a lot.
Yeah,
so we're pretty plugged into each other, so it doesn't feel like a necessary thing to. If anything got to the point where something isn't feeling good to one of us, that person usually says something, and then we have like, hey, can we talk? And then it's a talk, and then it might turn into a 3-hour thing. It might be 30 minutes. So it's like an as needed meeting, if you will, but we don't call it that. It's just like, hey, let's connect after the kids go down. I feel like I need to talk to you, or can we go on a walk tomorrow? Mm-hmm. If we're in an unresolved conflict, it's always, it becomes a very high value, and other things get pushed aside so that we can get back to a good place sooner, because it takes its toll the more days it goes on unresolved. And then
I can't focus when I know that there's tension. I can't work. I can't do anything. Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard. My day is so much harder when we're in a fight. It's just exponentially harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have date nights, sometimes date days or date mornings where we'll go on a walk, or we have one day a week usually while the kids are at school. And this is always harder in the summer. We have like a morning date where it's like we get back in bed, or we do something like that, some intimacy practice or just connection time. Those are the big ones.
Those are great. I love those. So if people want to find out more about you and your work, you mentioned that you have a podcast. Where can people find you? Tell us about your book. Tell us about any courses or any offerings that you might have that you would love to plug right now.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Relationshipschool.com is the main website. You can find our podcast there, all our courses there, Relationship Mastery, which is I think the most robust course on partnership out there that I designed, because we don't have this class in school or college, so
gosh, yeah.
One. Mm-hmm. And then my book's called Getting to Zero: How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships, and it's everywhere books are sold, and you can do Audible if you prefer that.
Love that. Thank you. Those will all be clickable links in the show notes. Yeah.
One more. Yeah. YouTube. I know you and Gio have talked about more YouTube action. I'm doing more how to demo skill videos on YouTube, and I'm having fun with that. So it's at Jayson Gaddis at YouTube.
Okay, great. We'll make sure that gets in there as well. This has been so useful and so helpful. I know that there's so many women, we talk about our health in terms of like what's the hormones, what's the diet, what's the fitness. But honestly, if your relationship isn't what you want it to be, that has such a huge impact on your health outcomes.
Yeah.
We all know that marriage generally, when we look at sort of longitudinal studies, depending on how you say it, does positively impact lifespan. But it can also, if it's not where it should be, it can also, on the very, very easily on the flip side, negatively impact your health span as well. Yeah. Not just the years that you live, but the health that you experience in those years. So your health span and your lifespan. So I think that it is worthy time. It's time well invested. And I think you've given us a lot of strategies and actionable items today. So thank you so much today, Jayson, for your brilliance and your focus and your time.
Oh, hell yeah. Thank you for bringing relational health into your podcast domain, because I'm so with you on that. Thanks.